to introduce his fellow presenters.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Walter.
All we got time for.
Yeah, that's all we got time for. Thank you for coming.
Right along now.
Yeah, a lot of the people here are my students, and people who are in this book have been visiting class. And I think more than any other class in my 37 or so years here have learned anything about what I do. I told them, because the other guy came in, Gary Graff came into class and talked about Hitsville, and he goes, "Oh, you got a suit on, you got dressed up." I go, "Well, this is my work uniform, actually." But he's never seen me, so then I had to explain why he doesn't see me looking like this, why Chris Tisch doesn't see me looking like this when I'm not here. But anyway, so what I want to do is, I'm just going to real quickly explain. This was an anthology. I did put a lot of it together during last year's residency here, and got a lot of the permissions signed and everything. All of these authors came together to write about various aspects of Detroit music, from jazz to hip hop and beyond. And what I'm really kind of proud of, as with the working class book, is that everybody who participated in this did it out of respect for Detroit music. Now, I've been saying this at a lot of the signings that we've been doing, that the book is not really about me. It's really about Detroit music and all the different artists that have come from Detroit. What I tried to do in the book is not, I mean, I had to have the real famous people that everybody knows in Detroit in here, like Eminem is represented, and we just in my class watched Sugar Man, so Rodriguez is represented. But there's
you had authors cover those guys.
yeah, I had authors cover those guys, and then there's other famous people. But one of the things I like about it, and some of the reviewers have said about it, is that there are artists in here too that are inherently Detroit artists that people aren't as familiar with, and by this book they'll learn about it. So the traditional stuff is in here, you know, the Motown people. But even when it gets to Motown, a couple of the essays in there are of the more, to me, interesting characters involved, which one has always been really interesting and important to me, is Flo Ballard, one of the original Supremes, who left the Supremes and had a pretty difficult life. So there's an essay on her in there. And then also Mary Wells, who was almost crowned the queen of Motown in the early days with My Guy and stuff, and she ended up separating from Motown and I think dying of cancer not too long ago. So there's that, and then when you get to the rock stuff, yes, the MC5 are in there, but also the Third Power's in there. Now some of you might be thinking, I don't know who they are. Well, that's why you need this book, quite frankly. And then there's discussions of Pepper Adams and Donald Byrd, who I think Donald Byrd went to school here at Wayne State, and also Ted Lucas, who you might not know about. Just curious, the hipsters here. Ted Lucas, who's heard that name before? Okay, then there you go. Now he's already got a book, so you need one. So anyway. And then there's many different things in it. So it goes in order of the music, kind of historically dating. It starts with jazz, then there's blues, then there is pre-Motown, which is the Fortune Records story, which we have now preserved for life through S.R. Boland's piece. And then Motown, of course, and then the 60s rock, which would be that MC5 period. And then the 70s, which is when Alice Cooper enters the scene, and then it goes into the 80s, some Wayne State punk stuff. Thanks. Sorry. I want to thank my student Stephen for getting, you know, what's in this bag is worth like a lot of money. I'm going to show it to you in a bit. And I left it in the classroom. I mean, we're talking thousands of dollars here. So thank you, Steve.
Yep. Bag of plasma.
It is. It keeps me going. So maybe if we just look at it kind of in the order of the book, let's start. Bill Harris actually has a tribute to Beans Bowles, who was really instrumental at Motown, especially in those early days, and as a jazz musician in Detroit. But he also writes about Roy Brooks. So maybe a little bit about Roy Brooks is, because how many of you have heard of Roy Brooks here? Okay, so most of you haven't. He is a really important, I would say, avant-garde, fringe, not quite Sun Ra, but close.
He was in a lot of things. He was really into bebop.
Right,
Came out of bebop and kind of branched from that in many ways. But he was just a solid bebop drummer. There's a place called Klein's. I don't know if anybody's going to talk about Klein's, but which was a bar, which is where Brooks kind of hung out. Even before he could get in the bar, he would be outside listening to the musicians inside, and eventually became old enough to work inside. Became one of the foundations in terms of rhythm sections in Detroit. Moved to New York. Became very influential in New York. Played with Horace Silver and other groups. Was just a really interesting man. And when I came to, on a personal thing, when I came to Wayne as a student, I was an art student, and in the art building, which is near here, there was this huge drum there, which belonged to Roy Brooks. I don't know why it was there, but I would occasionally play with a huge kind of Congo drum. And Roy, I'll read part of the end of this.
And I met him at a club, and he had a saw in his hand.
Right, which I'm going to read as soon as I can. Yeah, a saw, like
Real saw.
Like a saw. A saw.
A saw and a mallet.
Right. Brooks, a big man in a tuxedo and a blue-black silk skull cap that Thelonious Monk would envy, makes his way deliberately through the maze of instruments and musicians to center stage. Under his arm, he carries a hand saw. Is he some beatific, sartorially splendid carpenter making a house call? The crowd knows better. In anticipation, they shout their encouragement. Play the saw. Play the saw, Roy. Play the saw. Brooks adjusts the mic to waist height. The 4/4 groove continues, building through repetition. Roy Brooks, they chant, clapping in unison. Like a blues blacksmith with the saw handle locked between his knees, Brooks begins whacking the business end of the implement with a mallet. The saw sings, "When I lost my baby." Brooks, getting tremolo by bending the implement like a serrated steel snake with his left hand, does a languorous lateral body movement from pelvis to knees. The notes are extended until they vibrate. I almost lost my mind. Eases into, I'm so lonely I could die. Play the saw, baby, play the saw. Brooks ends his solo by gripping the handle firmly and shaking it with the ferocity of a shaggy dog emerging from a swim. The warbling steel crescendo explodes with the force of a sound of a southern gale across a sharecropper's tin-roofed shack. Play the saw, Roy. The years of serious work, exploration, and mastery have not obscured his sense of the dramatic. A performance by this landmark innovator is big fun, edutainment. Oblivious to the applause and the many musicians staring at him for direction, Brooks strikes the pizza-sized gong with short, powerful strokes and then disappears into the wings. Applause still ringing. Njube is his Swahili name. It means messenger.
And that's just a little taste of Ray. And what I thought, Roy, what I thought to mention too, there is a website that the Wayne State Press put up, and there's a playlist that kind of chronologically goes through the stuff that's available by these musicians in the whole book. And if you're on Spotify and you just want to look up Heaven Was Detroit, or it's something like Heaven Was Detroit, the soundtrack, which goes with this. And then also that is up on the website at Wayne State, which is heavenwasdetroit.com or org or something like that. You can find it. Okay, so that's a sample, like getting Roy Brooks in here, of course, there's a nice little piece in the beginning on the time that Miles Davis lived in Detroit and played the Bluebird in. Jim Galler kind of covers that in there, and his friend also does Pepper Adams and Donald Byrd, this guy I met in New York, and he's, I think, in Atlanta now. So, but even earlier than the jazz stuff in many ways, or the early part of jazz, is where Robert Jones comes in, and he wrote about meeting Son House. Now, Son House, my students know because Robert visited us, but others here may not be as aware of it. So I asked him if he'd bring his guitar so he could give us a sample of what Son sounded like, and also tell a little bit of his story.
Okay. Hi. Son House was one of the major figures, some would call him the father of the Delta Blues. You got to understand that blues came from different parts of the country geographically and in different parts of the century chronologically. So one of the most isolated areas of the South is the Mississippi Delta, where basically you grow cotton, you deal with the ins and outs and the ups and downs of life. And Son House came out of that era. He was a man who was full of contradictions. At some point, he was a preacher. And in fact, I wonder if we can find this little thing. He did a interview with Studs Terkel.
Oh, wow.
Back in the day, and he was telling Studs how he came to become a bluesman. And so in this interview, I'm kind of like Bill. I'm like, okay, where is it? Okay, and so in this interview, Studs asked him how he came into the blues, and his affect was pretty interesting. He had that Mississippi Delta drawl accent. He said, I didn't like guitar when I first heard it. Oh, gee, you couldn't stand a guy playing the guitar. See, I was churchy then, But he was playing so good with that bottleneck, I didn't want all the people to see me watching. Now, at this point, he's a licensed preacher going around and preaching in various congregations in Mississippi. All them around him, together, and it sounded so good to me that I eased up behind him, peeped over his shoulder, it sounded so good, I didn't want him to know I was watching, see, cause I was so churchy. So I said, well, I believe I'll try this thing. But he had a medicine bottle, I tried with that medicine bottle, but I cut up my hands a couple times. I said, I'm gonna study another plan for this thing. So I studied up the plan what I got now. And I done started playing with those bottlenecks. Well, Charlie Patton, he could never use them, neither could Willie Brown. Nary one of them could use them, cause you see, you take a bottleneck just like you take your naked finger, and chord like that. Well, that bottleneck ain't gonna do nothing. It sound like the devil. You gotta keep your hand moving, and they never could get that hand, so they couldn't play. So what he's talking about is not just playing the guitar. He's talking about taking a slide and getting in between the notes to sort of get the guitar to sing. And this is called Bottleneck Blues, because originally the idea was they would break the neck off of a whiskey bottle, preferably whiskey. And before you had synthesizers, that's how you got your... So like I said, Son's life is sort of full of contradictions. At one point he's a preacher, another point he's a blues man, and when he's a preacher, he's a teetotaling preacher. when he's a blues man, he's a hard-drinking blues man. So that makes for a schizophrenic situation and a really bad show. One of the contradictions that I found is just amazing how life works, is his son house is buried in Mount Hazel Cemetery on Lasher in Detroit. And when he was buried, when he died in 1988, his family bought a tombstone. And so obviously the tombstone is laid out at the top of the grave, and all the graves sort of go this way. But son, being such a great luminary of the blues, the Detroit Blues Society and others pitched in and bought him a memorial tombstone, humongous thing, black marble image on it, quotation on the back, he lies, one of the greatest bluesmen of all time. It's wonderful. Except when they finished it, it was too big to put on the grave. So if you had put it on the grave going the right way, you'd have covered 3 graves. So what they had to do is sit it on his grave, literally going in the opposite direction. So Son House not only is a man of contradictions, not only does he have 2 tombstones, but they're pointing 2 different ways. Well, this is a little bit of a song he did called Preachin Blues.
About how you found Son House working at Wayne State University.
Well, you know, after he had passed, I had heard a rumor that he'd worked at Wayne State, lied about his age a lot. And he had worked on Rochester, he'd worked on the Empire State Express in Rochester, New York. When he left New York, he came to Detroit, and he died here and was buried here. And I was looking through personnel records and found that there is an Eddie James House Jr., who was apparently worked in the medical school taking care of animals when they did lab experiments. So he is, if not an alumnus, at least an employee of Wayne State University. And probably was the last job he had, last steady job he had before he declined and died.
What year was that?
Let's see, he died in '88. It probably would have been somewhere in the maybe mid to late 70s. Yeah.
And Robert, you know, finding that out, tracked him down, and at that time he was in a nursing home and probably with dementia and stuff. But Robert went to visit him and at least be with him and ended up then meeting the family and still knowing the family and being a pallbearer at his funeral. So you've got kind of a direct connection in Detroit with this guy here, Son House, who probably has become more famous in recent years because Jack White has covered a couple of his songs, Death Letter Blues and Grinning in Your Face and a few other ones. I don't know if he's done that one. So, next is, in the blues category then, is R.J. Spangler, who himself leads many, many different bands. The most recent big little band is Planet Dino Nay. And so welcome R.J. Spangler, who has a big bloodline to jazz and blues in Detroit.
My uncle, starts with my uncle, dies with me, right? You know. Anyway, it's an honor to be here. Mike, thanks for having us and these two gentlemen here. You know, he was speaking about Roy Brooks, and I took lessons from Roy Brooks and from Junbei, the messenger, and he had a big giant drum choir with as many as like 30 guys up there. And I would sometimes when we do gigs with that group, I'd show up early and we'd set up all the instruments. So it was a great little experience for me when I was like 19, 20 years old to spend like a whole afternoon putting together drum equipment with Roy Brooks and get to know him. You know, you mentioned him being in avant-garde. He was part of avant-garde, but he was a hard bop guy. As you mentioned, he recorded with Horace Silver, quintessential hard bop, real Detroit guy. You know, he was a master. And sometimes throughout my life, I'd be playing a gig. Or I'd come out to see Roy at his gig, I should say, and I'd be there, and Roy would be playing a gig where he's playing drums, he's got a piano player, and maybe a couple horns, and a bass player, and he'd see me, go, Rick, come here, and then I'd have the honor of playing the drums while he went out with his saw and played. It was always like, wow, I'm getting to do this, you know, it was pretty darn cool for me, you know. So yeah. And then
So as you growed up,
yeah, that's how we growed up. That's how we say the English department, isn't it? Yeah.
that's how we say it. I can't speak for the others.
As you can see, I growed.
You do, I growed right with you. But
What's those Travis French fries, man?
yeah. I remember one time talking about Travis hamburgers, and I mentioned RJ if you'd ever eaten there. He goes, "Are you kidding? I got them on speed dial." So anyway. You know, as time went on, RJ started to work with a lot of the legends and sort of manage and play with them and travel. So,
Blues legends, yeah.
Yeah, the blues legend.
And that's where Robert and I come kind of together here. Robert was on WDET, had a great radio show back when DET was really a great radio station with music. And
Still a radio station.
it's still a radio station, but they don't have music as much as they did. They kind of joined the national trend of talk radio. And it's sad because they never raised as much money as when you were there because people supported you. People loved you. And my uncle was the program director at DET back in the old days. And so I kind of grew up around all those folks, you know. Anyway, the blues, I was involved with putting that big headstone on
So
Son Houses. Yeah, I helped with that too. And I ended up with a great black blues guitar player named Johnny Bassett. And Johnny Bassett, as the Butler twins would say to me later on, he's just a sideman, RJ, because Johnny had to that point, he'd been like Chicago Pete's guitar player. He'd been a guitar player in a lot of bands. He was Joe Weaver's guitar player. So I come and find him like about 90, 91. I run across him at a gig. And I got to get his number, and I'm calling him up, and I said, yeah, look, we got to play a gig, and I had him play a little bar on the east side, the Old Tap Room. I don't know if you guys ever know that one, but it's a little joint on the outside of Grosse, it's just in Detroit outside of Grosse Pointe. And we played a little gig there, had a great time, and I could tell that he had never really played with a bunch of white guys before, you know. He'd lived his whole life playing in Detroit for black blues audiences, you know. And he didn't really know that there was, you know, he saw the greats like B.B. King, but he didn't know that there was a place between playing at some bar over on Greenfield and where B.B. was. There's a whole level of business in there, you know, and I know about that, you know. I was able to say to him, look, let's get you some original songs, I'll get you some record deals, let's take you to Europe, let's see America. And we did all those things. And because of that, then I was having some success. And a great black blues singer, she was our queen of the blues, no doubt about it. She just died about 3 years ago at age 97, Alberta Adams. She sees me at a gig that I had helped organize, and she says, RJ, I want you to be my manager. And I said, oh, isn't the famous Coachman your manager? And of course, that takes us back to WDET, because he had the afternoon blues show, and famous Coachman had the nighttime show. He was Coachman was a character. If you looked at his driver's license, it really said famous Coachman. His first name was famous.
That's right.
I kid you not. And I loved the guy. He was quite a character. You know, he would take a stack of WDET stickers to pass out at an event, and he'd sell them for $1 a piece. You know? He was a character, you know. But he was the deal. He was, and so I was cool with him. So I had to go talk to him, and he said, Jay, it's okay. And I had permission to take over being Alberta's manager. And again, like I did with Johnny, I got her some pretty significant record deals. One time, we were, again, going back to DET, we did a live hookup from DET with Scott Simon's Weekend Edition. And we were on a pretty good label. It was distributed nationally very well, and internationally. Label out of Minneapolis, I was taking care of it at that point. And just after being on that show that one weekend, we sold 10,000 CDs that week.
Mm-hmm.
You know, in our little world, the guys playing. Remember, we're talking about guys who are just playing little local bars. You know, this is some business. You know, they're getting some checks now. You know, and we start to see some places and go places and people. Alberta had recorded for Chess Records. Anybody know Chess Records?
Yeah.
A couple of you guys, show hands. Chess Records. Okay, that's not bad. That's pretty impressive. There was a movie a couple years ago called Cadillac Records, and it was kind of a takeoff on that. Chess Records, Leonard Chess just died recently, just about a month or so ago. They were guys in Chicago, had a record label, and tell me if you know these names. On their label, they had Muddy Waters, Howlin' Wolf, Bo Diddley, Chuck Berry.
Yeah.
They all recorded for Chess. So there was a powerhouse label. And Alberta was really one of the few Detroiters, Eddie Burns, a few Detroiters to record for that label. So here I'm able to take that information, and I know the right people in the business that they go, oh, you know who Alberta Adams is. You can. So I could book her places. I remember I took her first time to play down Memphis for a big blues event down there, and she came on, and people were waiting for her. We'd been playing with Johnny in the band, and it was going great. And then she comes on, and all of a sudden it was like the paparazzi, these flashballs, because these European guys, they never thought they'd ever get to see Alberta Adams. So it was like a real big deal, you know. And so I had a good 20-year relationship with her where we were partners, you know. We'd make records, we split the money down the middle, I took care of the business, and she sang, and she was one of the nicest, the most wonderful people I ever worked with. We played, we drove through about 48 states. I played in about 35 of them. And we played the San Francisco Blues Festival, the Vancouver Jazz Festival, the Chicago Blues Festival, the Apollo Theater in New York, in Harlem. We did pretty well. And if I'd ever been able to get her a passport, I turned down a good 15 events in Europe because she really didn't want to fly. So it was hard to get her to want to get a passport, you know.
So what RJ did for the students in the Detroit class now, and unfortunately a lot of these people have passed on, but RJ was able many times to bring Alberta to class.
Yep.
With her sunglasses on for the morning class, and Johnny Bassett that came, and then also Sir Mac Rice showed up.
I had a whole bunch of guys that after Alberta, I started with Johnny, and I got Alberta, and then it kind of snowballed from there. Johnny Bassett had been a member of Joe Weaver and the Blue Notes, which was kind of the band that was the progenitor to the Funk Brothers. Who knows the Funk Brothers? Y'all are getting cool. I'm in your neighborhood now, huh? All right. The Funk Brothers were the house band at Motown Records. And the Funk Brothers rhythm section, Joe and I got to go to the Waldorf Astoria in New York when they inducted the Funk Brothers rhythm section into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
Wow.
And that's because Joe's first cousin was Benny Benjamin.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
One of the major funk
and there was James Jamerson and Benny Benjamin. They were the rhythm section of Motown. And so we got to go there, and Joe got up and accept the award. And it was funny because like Mayor Bloomberg had spoken, and Cy Oyster, all these like Jan Winter, all these famous people talked before him. Then they started bringing the musicians up, and we're early in the program. Of course, Joe's already, we had a big reception we went to. Joe's already had some drinks, right? So, and you know, good for him. Anyway, so he's up there talking, and he's basically trying to say that y'all wouldn't have this rock and roll music if it wasn't for me and my cousin. It took him a really hard time to get that point out, and he did it. And the next people up were Billy Joel and Elton John together, and they're a little drunk, and they're swearing and stuff. They go, "That bloke, he's right," you know, and they co-signed it right away. And it was interesting because later on, Joe and I were in line to go to the bathroom, and it's this big long line, and in front of us is Rob Thomas from Matchbox 20. Behind us is John Mayer. And they're both like, "You're that guy! You're so cool!" And they had a picture taken with Joe Weaver.
Wow. Let's look at just a taste of Alberta performing, and I'm assuming you're playing drums?
No, I don't think so. This is the Don No, it's Don was and this guy. That's my bass player. City Horns. Willie Terry Thunder at drums. That's Louie. Yeah, Resto.
Louie's in the book too.
Been to Chicago, Atlanta, GA, Memphis, Tennessee, New Orleans, of course.
We've been to all those places.
No matter where I roam, Detroit is my home. I've been around a long time. I really paid my dues.
Bob Seger's horn section.
I've taken 60,000 people, 20,000 or more. No matter where I roam, Detroit is my home. Lord, baby, come on with it, come on with it, come on with it.
So, you get the gist. So thank you, RJ. Please come on over here to do your thing. I'll introduce. Now, Thomas Trimble is a longtime Detroit musician, and word on the street is that his group just released, is going to release a new record, American Mars. But many years ago, when Tom was just knee-high to a grasshopper, he was my student here at Wayne, and now he's got his PhD and he works in the rhetoric and composition program. But he was part of, even back then, he was part of what I would call the early Wayne State punk rock scene. He was in several groups that played at the Hamtramck thing, Weeping Rachel and others. And he knew this band, who we all did, who were around Wayne State at the time. If we weren't, 50 or 60 years old, we knew, and I wasn't then, called Cat House. And so I knew that, so I said, Tom, would you write their story? So their story is in the book as sort of representative of the Wayne State, Cass Corridor, Detroit scene.
Yeah, so first of all, thanks very much. I was ML student back in the 80s. I'm having nostalgia this week because the first Gulf War in '91, there were protests on campus, and we're back there again. So I'm having a little bit of a bittersweet.
Yeah.
But I grew up in the suburbs, but came to Wayne State in like 1986, and my first day down here for orientation, I saw a poster on one of the posts out here for a punk rock band called Dad and the Boys. It kind of flipped my lid. It was a picture of a soldier in a gas mask, and I was like, what's going on here? So what I soon discovered is that late 80s, 90s, there was a very rich post-punk, punk rock scene here at Wayne State and in the Cass Corridor. Now, in this period, we're in the sort of the shadows of post-punk. There were a lot of bands around, and there were a lot of bad bands. I was a part of many of those bad bands. But everybody knew somebody that was in a band. And there were lots of places to play. So there was Finney's Pub, there was Alvin's. If you played at Alvin's, you were doing pretty well. There was the Old Miami. We had the community concert series, which was like Friday, Saturday night thing. You get free chili. It was the first time I smelled marijuana.
That's right.
You see punk rock bands play.
He looks at me.
Yeah, that's right.
But it was for many months or years early on. It was held in what is now owned by Wayne State, but it used to be an Episcopal church. It's still the church building. It looks kind of like a church by Manuki in there.
Yep.
That's where there was a hip pastor who ran it, and he let us come in, and it was like it started Friday night and it ended like Saturday sometime. It was all night.
But poets, bands, activists, all kinds of folks. But so there's a lot of music, and this is right when sort of college rock becomes a big deal. So you had bands like REM and U2 and Depeche Mode achieve a lot of mainstream success, but then there was this sort of undercurrent of just kind of garage punk rock bands. And I'm feeling a little bit of that insecurity this afternoon. A lot of us who played in those bands were both musically insecure and ignorant. So this is like in the punk. We didn't know how to play guitars, we didn't know how to play instruments, and we didn't know a lot about the great music. So we were learning. So we were trying to emulate what we thought this great music was. So I said there's a lot of bad bands, but this is a band, Cat House, that was popular in the late 80s and early 90s. And they occupy what I call in my chapter kind of a dead branch in Detroit rock history. This is before Jack White, this is before Eminem, this is in a sort of intermediate period. A lot of these bands just kind of, you're sort of stereotypical, were in vans, touring around, trying to put out CDs. They didn't have record labels, just putting out records and driving around. But this band was exceptional. A couple of them were Wayne State students, a couple of them worked here around in the community, and you would just see them around. And I saw this band at about 3 in the morning at the community concert series. They played the song Bitch by the Rolling Stones, and they played with a sort of ferocity and a naivety that just was very impressive to behold. One of the most interesting things about Cat House was their audience. It was not unusual this period. You go up to bars, rock bars in Hamtramck, a very white audience, a very suburban audience. All kinds of different people went to see Cat House. You would see Wayne State instructors. You would see Cass Quarter pot dealers. You would see hippies. You would see like skinheads. They were just like any person you could imagine was at a Cat House show, and they were all dancing, which was really amazing and amazing to me. But they played with a ferocity and an emotion that really, for a young kid following this band, was incredible. They, like a lot of bands, had bad luck, and some of their bad luck stories have now become semi-legendary. They were on their first national tour, and their lead singer, Elizabeth Underwood, suffered an abdominal hemorrhage, which she played with for about 2 weeks before she got home and had to have emergency surgery. Their stuff was always broken. Their house over on Commonwealth was broken into at least 2 or 3 times. Luckily, they never had very good gear, so it was easy to replace. But they're always getting their stuff stolen. And then the famous story that I like to tell, and I talk about a little bit in the chapter, is Jim Johnson, who's the fellow there on the far left. Cat House never could get their stuff to gigs, so they were always talking about they're going to buy a van. They're going to buy a van, but they never had any money. So they put like a couple $1,000s together. Jim put some of his own money in. They finally bought this beat to crap GMC van. It was going to be their touring van. On the way home from picking up the van, they stopped at a gas station at Woodward and Forest. The electrical harness caught fire while they were filling it up, and the thing burnt to the ground. So they are pulling their stuff out of the back of the van, trying to get the stuff out. And so they're back to square one. So they put out a couple records, pretty good records, on a label called Nocturnal Records, put out by a guy named Chris Verity, who put out some records by bands Wig, 13 Engines from Toronto, the Orange Roughies. They sold okay, they were on college radio, they did a couple of national tours, but then they just kind of ran out of gas, which was a kind of, you know, a very common story for bands in this period, for bands in any period. But when ML asked me to think about that period and sort of the myriad failures, commercial failures of bands during this time, Cathouse struck me as a band that was artistically successful, and I think I make the argument that I think was one of the last great rock bands in the Cass Corridor and the Wayne State community. That scene has pretty much dried up. The places to play have dried up. Other forms of music have kind of displaced it. People don't go out and see rock bands as much as they used to. But this was a great band, and I thought their story really deserved to be told.
Yeah, it is a great story. Yeah, so for my students, it was quite a scene down here at that particular time. I'm going to introduce Jarrett, but just real quick, I'm going to just show you guys a few things. There is a really nice essay in this book on Black Forum Records. Now, Black Forum is a division of Motown that that Berry Gordy eventually was forced to acknowledge in the early 70s because he always was kind of middle of the road. So this is Elaine Brown, who was a Black Panther, who actually sings. She was a singer, still is a singer actually. She's alive out in Oakland. This was a famous CD album that was made, of course probably not popular anymore, but Ossie Davis and Bill Cosby. Not talking about what you think. The Congressional Black Caucus.
It's still half famous.
It's still half famous.
It was once infamous. But
So this one is a treasure of mine. This is Amiri Baraka's first album on Black Forum. That was there. Was fortunate to get it signed so before he passed away. Yeah, yeah. So this one is really was really stupid of me to leave in the room. This is probably the more expensive one from it, and this is actually a sealed one. This is Guess Who's Coming Home. It was done by Wallace Terry, he wrote a book called Blood Brothers about black soldiers in Vietnam, and he also recorded many of them. So this was one. This was one of the early ones that was in the can, Langston Hughes and Margaret Danner, who was around Wayne State in the early days of poetry. This is quite a prize too. This is The Black Spirits. Now this one here had Clarence Major and David Henderson and Farouk's arch nemesis Stanley Crouch and Larry Neal and of course Amiri Baraka. Now one of the things is I'm just showing you these that how this could happen in Detroit was because of Woody King. Woody King was the conduit to Motown and he helped to get these records made. This is Stokely Carmichael from SNCC and doing a speech on Free Huey Newton. And then this is one that is really important. It's, and I think it's sealed too, is Martin Luther King's Why I Opposed the War in Vietnam that was delivered at Riverside Church in New York City. So there's a nice essay by a guy who did a lot of work on that and in the book. So you should, you know, if you get the book or my students who are here with it. And these are some of the early bird things. One is the Great March to Freedom, which were on Gordy records, but they're kind of the early Black Forum. This is the Detroit version of the I Have a Dream, and then this is the March on Washington one. So worth mentioning to you so you know about it. And the essay is quite good. Now, Jarrett, I was just going to show this. You know, Motown had a rock division too, and this is an album by a group that was called the Sunday Funnies, played the Grandy and so forth, and kind of a horn band, you know, a bigger band, and actually Andrew Oldham produced this record from this Detroit group, and that's kind of a rarity nowadays too. So, but Jarrett ends the book because Jared is a young record company owner and producer who just is helping to put John Sinclair's new album out on vinyl, but he's also done some early Detroit punk stuff. And maybe if you can say a few words, Jarrett. This is Jarrett Coral.
Well, I certainly appreciate being a part of this book. It's a pretty epic tome, and I appreciate ML getting this all together because I knew he worked pretty tirelessly on assembling at least the list of authors, and because I know I got at least 500 emails from him a week about this book, so I appreciate it.
I needed that closing essay.
Oh yeah, that's it. No, but I started the record label Jet Plastic Recordings in 2012 when I believe I was 13 years old.
Bring up the website.
And from this, I've really been able to. I've been grateful to have been able to work with a lot of local musicians. Some known, some not known. Mostly I started off doing rock groups, but then I gravitated towards doing reissues or issues of previously unavailable material. Recently, it's been an honor to work with a guy named Billy Davis, who Hank Ballard and the Midnighters, that guy, and it's been pretty cool because he wrote he wrote a bunch of these songs with Hank Ballard, like "Finger Poppin' Time," which, as you may not know, it's the opening song to that movie The Sandlot, which was that the kids' baseball movie, and other stuff like that. Like he helped teach Chubby Checker the dance moves to the twist and stuff like that. So I've been going back and forth with him, recording some stuff, and it's been pretty cool to do that. But on this end, I've been able to work with some of these people. And scroll down a bit if you can.
You have a Billy Davis record on your label?
It's coming out next month. Yeah. But I was able to put out a record by the Necros and another record by Negative Approach, which is coming soon. I really like the Midwest hardcore scene, stuff like that, Decroids and stuff like, as you were talking about, that scene. Because now it seems to evolved into some degree of pretentiousness with the downtown Cass Corridor, Shinola, $500 watch, Third Man Dog Leash people who, not to talk bad about anybody, but I'm just saying, it's kind of evolved into that rather than when it was kind of like a revolutionary period where people were actually going out and attempting to get their names out there, and now they just buy fancy moleskin notebooks. But it's really cool.
Little commentary.
Keeping it real.
Damn, Detroit. But it's been really cool because one of the last working actual record presses in the United States is here. Archer Record Pressing, and it's on Davison.
Which there's an essay in the book on that.
And it's been really cool to work with them because when I was starting the label in 2012, there were only maybe like 10 or 11 like widely working plants like United Record Pressing in Nashville, and I was honored to have been able to work with this place that is like 20 minutes from my house or so, and I can just walk there and talk to the guys and see the records being pressed, which is pretty cool. But obviously production costs have gotten to be a lot more than they were, because I saw Peggy Bach, the wife of Frank Bach from the Up, she showed me an invoice where it was like by 500 7-inch records for that Up record, and it was $125 then. And now it's like, if I want to make 545s, it's like over $1,000. So I mean, you got to be pretty selective when it comes to that. But I'm working with John Sinclair on his new album now, and Johnny Bassett is on that. They got some tracks from him before he passed.
I know about
And,
that.
Yeah, and that was really cool. Along with Wayne Kramer from the MC5, who is damned to keep that MC5 documentary from release. But it's been really cool working with these local musicians, and I've talked to ML about working with Coyote Monk, which is something that I hope
we'll do that. Yeah, we'll do
someday
that
soon. But yeah.
So he started. You were what? 14? Did you
13.
13. Yeah. So that thank you. That's good. That's what I wanted to put in the book on. And there's a piece on Zoot's Coffee House, which was really big on Wayne's campus. I mean, like Sleater Kenny played there, and many other famous groups in this little hole in the wall on 3rd. right on campus actually. So I'll just say this to conclude, and if anyone does have any questions, keep them to yourself. No, if you have any questions, you can ask them. But some people are wonder sometimes, like, what is the title? So here's the explanation of the title, which is in my introduction. Is I wanted Lester Bangs, who's a very famous rock journalist. Also, Grill Marcus is in there too. He's been very kind. He's going to do some book signings with us on the West Coast. But I wanted Lester Bangs in it, but I had to find something by Lester that was pre, the Carburetor Dung book and stuff like that, because that's all owned by Penguin, the publisher. So I found an article he wrote as a freelancer on the early Alice Cooper. Now it's kind of like Bob Seger. Early Alice Cooper was really good. Early Bob Seger was really good. Something went wrong as they grew. But the early part, so he had one on called All American something, All American Story, and so but related to him, I found a fake letter from the archives that said it was sent to Dave Marsh after he died, but it wasn't really by Lester, but it looked like it was, and it came in the mail to Dave Marsh, who's a really famous writer too, and he did the forward for me. And
Best Detroit roots.
Definitely, he went to Wayne State too, at least for a class. I don't know. You never know about some of those early guys, how long they were actually here. But he wrote this letter that came and it arrived in the mail to Marsh like 2 years after Lester's death, from Lester Bangs in heaven. And in it he said that as the letter went on, he's talking about a lot of different things that had been happening, and he said, you know how you always hear that crap that there must be a hell of a band in heaven with Jimi Hendrix and Janis Joplin and Jim Morrison? He said, it's not true at all. All we have up here is Karen Carpenter, Jim Croce, and that guy who sings Montego Bay. And he said, that all makes me truly believe that heaven was Detroit. And so that's where the title. Any questions for any of I didn't really, they're so darn heavy.
What you been doing, man?
Literally.
But yeah, they're 6 pounds, I think. That's what Marsh said. I'm going to clobber you in the head with a 6-pound book. But I wanted to say it is a #1 bestseller on Amazon. So keep it up there on Amazon. Thanks everybody. Thanks for my students. Any other questions?
They're gone.
They're gone. Thank you.
Before you
Thank
guys
you.
go, can we take a picture? Before you guys go? Can we take a picture of us?